What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. Another episode of CFP Talks. I'm David Fuchs. There's Joe Nissum, lead instructor for Nissum Tutoring. And last week we had on a couple of former students. They were awesome. It was great getting their insight, not only going through the process to study for the CFP, but what they felt were successful keys to passing. And it was such a successful episode. We wanted to bring on another former student. So you'll see a unfamiliar face, but you'll get to know him by over the next 20 or 25 minutes. Jake Castillo. Jake, welcome on. Pleasure to have you. And what's going on?
Young guys, doing good. Yeah, so to just introduce myself, Jake Castillo. I'm a financial planner here out in Southern California at a wealth management firm, Pacific Capital. Currently been with the firm for around 2 years and 5 months. And yeah, a little bit about myself.
That's awesome. So, Jake, tell me a little bit about what encouraged you to even consider the CFP, or like what put it on your radar. Why did you want to take it? I mean, you're fairly young, you're fairly young in your career. What kind of pushed you to go and take the test?
Yeah, I think it was primarily driven through self-research and a lot of influence here at my firm. I work with two CFPs in the office, and I started my internship with the firm I'm currently at, and from there, just CFP sparked my interest, my passion for financial planning and investment management. So that's really where it started to cultivate and really grow my passion for it. And then obviously I wanted to obtain some sort of designation, some sort of coursework in order to learn and develop my financial planning skills and really become an asset here at Pacific Capital. So that's where it started.
That's awesome. And that's a pretty common thing that we see with a lot of people is kind of work with a couple CFPs. You see some people around the office, you kind of look it up and you realize how comprehensive the coursework is and how beneficial it could be. David, I'm sorry I cut you off. And you're
Oh,
about to say
no,
something.
not at all.
Okay.
I was just curious, like when you realized, hey, I want to take this exam, and you said you started to do your research and you worked with a couple of CFPs. I'm just curious how that process went. Did you go through and compare all the different education services? Did you know you wanted to, at the end, ultimately use a tutor? How much did you utilize the education when you were going through the modules? I'm just curious, kind of that process, because everybody's is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so primarily through research, right? I looked at the different course providers, right?
Yeah.
There's Kaplan, and there's all kinds of different ones. There's Dalton that you can choose from to get the education done first. So I just went with the one that would fit with my schedule, particularly, right? I like the live structured session, so that's why Kaplan was one of my top choices. And then further on, right, after completing the coursework and whatnot, you go into review mode, right? So looking at different providers as well from there. And I actually saw Joe on LinkedIn. I said, man, I think this would be a great fit for me. His learning style, his structure, the way you're supposed to learn, right? He has videos out on that, on how to really learn the material. So that's what stuck out to me, and ultimately me deciding to work with Joe and try to get the exam passed on the first try.
Good man. Good man. So, all right. So you're first time test taker. You sit there, you go through the Kaplan process, you come out, and we start doing kind of our live review. And we took November. So we started in June. We started end of June. So we had 18 weeks that we were working together. I know my answer to this, but I always like to hear it from a student's perspective. I asked David the same question. The guys last week, I asked them the same question. You have to boil it down to one or two things that helped you pass. What would you say the most important things are that helped you pass?
Yeah, I'd say the most important things, at least for me, was sticking to the schedule that you provided, right? I love the idea of having my things laid out on a week-to-week basis on what I have to do and what I have to accomplish, right? And I would use that kind of as the minimum standard, right? I would complete my work and, the weekly readings, reviews, and whatnot, and lectures. Then I would go into more into, what I struggled on maybe during the week. I would review lectures that we took. I would review old notes that we took during the week and making sure those were just ingrained, and going back and rewatching videos and all those little extra things as well that I did. Those were probably the main points that helped me get through this exam.
Okay. So when you're going through and reviewing your notes, what are you typically doing in that scenario? Are you going back through and rewatching the lesson from start to end? Were you going, I mean, obviously we had worksheets that were part of it and case studies. So what were you doing in addition to what I had laid out, or were you going back and just doing it for repetition purposes, or what were you doing it for?
hmm Yeah, so the main thing for me was going back and reviewing the lectures. If there was something that was missed or something I didn't quite understand when we were doing it live, right? Or maybe I just need to retake on it. That's where I think it was most helpful for me to, review those recorded lectures and really understand what you were saying, what maybe one of my classmates were saying at the time. I really, use that and then go into the worksheets again and practice those on whatever areas I may have been struggling or I just needed to review on.
So I have a question for you, Jake. So, and by the way, passing on the first time, congratulations on that. That is a huge accomplishment. Um, so coming in, obviously you've taken some FINRA exams, you kind of know what the process is. What were your expectations before you enrolled in your education course and your prep with Joe? And how is the whole process and the actual exam different than what your expectations were?
Yeah, so just like I like how you referenced the FINRA exam. The only ever FINRA exam I've taken is the SIE prior to this. So I had no other experience in,
Yeah.
37 or 366, right? The only one
85
I had
question
passed.
entry exam, going right from that to CFP.
Oh,
That's
wow. Okay. All right. I didn't realize that, but okay.
like no 6, no 7, no, you just went SIE.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right,
That's a big,
SIE.
that's going from varsity high school basketball, like right to the pros, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah. So I knew those exams are primarily memorization, right? And, more
Right.
basic concepts. But luckily, I already had some background in financial planning, right? Through CFPs in my office and working on it. So it was a nice transition, and I was ready to learn and wanting to learn the material. So I feel like, I knew it was going to be a lot of information, a lot of work ahead, but I was happy to do it.
So was it harder than you thought? Was it maybe not as hard as what people told you? I'm just curious because you didn't really have a basis going in. Like a lot of people that take the CFP, they take the 7 and the 63 or the 66, so they think that it's going to be like that. And
hmm
in my opinion, it's a lot harder than that. And people will tell you that, but everybody goes in with their own expectations. So I'm just curious for you, since you didn't really have a basis, was this harder than you thought it was going to be? Or was it not as hard as what people told you?
Oh, for sure. It was hard as people said as it was. The CFPs in my office are like, it's a tough exam, it's
Yeah.
gonna make you think. Joe at the same time was like, hey, when it comes to exam time, they're gonna hit you with this, this, and this. So my expectations were met to how difficult the exam was gonna be, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this exam was an odd one, Jake. So obviously you took it with a group of people, and we kind of ran the gamut where some people we had a couple people not make it to the finish line. We had some people go in and take the test and pass with flying colors, inclusive of yourself. We had some people go in there and thought the exam was wildly different than what was expected. What was when you came out of that exam? I know what you emailed me, but kind of what was your impression of the exam? Did you feel like the CFP mocks were representative of the exam? Did you feel like the way that the CFP kind of proposed the exam was what they actually put there? Like, they put those percentages on. Did you feel like the mocks were really truly representative, not just from a difficulty, but from an actual distribution of questions. Like, yeah, I'm going to see 30 investment questions, and that's what I really saw. Did you feel like it was a fair representation?
As far as the weights, yes, I do feel like it was pretty in line with what the CFP board, says. In terms of difficulty, I do feel like the CFP mock exams that you get when you first pay, to sit for the exam and whatnot, are a little bit easier than the CFP exam was, right? Just in the basics of the questions, and really the CFP mock exams tested fundamentals heavily as compared to the actual CFP exam that was set for this November. It was a little bit more trickier, a little bit more specific on certain items of, investment planning and whatnot. So I feel like the CFP mock exams are a good baseline, but I feel like it's expected to be a little bit harder on the actual exam day.
That's a good perspective.
Yeah. Did you feel like you got smacked around on the first quarter of the exam? That the general consensus was the first quarter was tough.
Yeah, I sat there right when I sat down to press start to take the exam. The first 15 questions, I was like, "Oh no!" Right? I had that
you're 0 for 15 already.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, "Whew!" I would say I had good foundational knowledge to answer them and make, if I had to, educated guesses. But yeah, they were a little tricky. But luckily, I studied hard for it. Was able to get through it.
Did you, because I always find it interesting how people pace themselves for the exam, because it's a long day, and there's obviously 4 quarters of the exam and then the halfway point. And I think one thing that people they underestimate going in is you have to be conditioned for the exam, or you're not going to make it through, whether you know the materials or not. And one thing, so I took it twice. I failed last November and then took it again in March and passed it. And one thing that I made a significant stride with was my fatigue and conditioning for the exam. And you only took it one time. So I'm curious from your perspective, how you felt like your conditioning was. And obviously you ended up passing, but I'm wondering if that was an issue for you at any point during the 170 questions.
Good question. I feel like Joe Wood's doing to shape pretty good, honestly. We take around 5 to 6 practice exams before that, right around there.
Yep.
Lots of questions. I think he does a great job of conditioning you, even in the difficulty of questions, right? So making your brain spin, making you guess yourself, making you look at the answer choices again and again. So I think I was conditioned pretty well, and with those 5, 6 practice exams, I was ready for test day, and I was ready to get through it.
Yeah, like I kind of made that a point, especially with your group, to like really have you guys ready conditioning wise. And we kind of knew that. I mean, it's not uncommon for CFP to smack you in the face for those first 43. So that was not uncommon for them. Did you feel like the exam had any surprises, Jake?
Oh yeah, I feel
obviously without violating your ethical standard, you are a CFP now.
Right. The CFP board definitely has some tricks up their sleeve. I feel like it's going to be one subject matter or the other, right? They're going to have something for you that you might feel uncomfortable with. Something like, hey, I've seen this a little before, but I'm not too familiar with it, right? So they'll throw something at you, and you just have to be ready for it. Rely on your studying, your fundamentals that you've learned that we work on throughout the whole time you're preparing for the exam. So yeah.
So last week we had 2 guys on the show, Brennan and Nico. And one thing that stuck out that Brennan said is there needed to be a repeatable process. He kept on saying that over and over again. And what I'm hearing from you is you keep on referencing fundamentals, which obviously is one of my cornerstones. It's probably in the video that you watched before we met that, basically connected us to working together. I'm a big believer in fundamentals because I believe that most standardized testing is some expression of your fundamental concepts. You've now mentioned it probably 3 or 4 times. What do you think the role of fundamentals was in your prep? And how do you think that actually translated on exam day?
hmm Yeah, I think you said it correctly. Like you said, how you preach your fundamentals, right? I think from even week one, you emphasized the importance of it, right? Having foundational concepts in each of the different planning aspects, right? Knowing different things and really practicing and honing those things in, right? If it's we're focused on the state, learning the fundamentals of titling, right? If it's investment management, learning the fundamentals of these different things, right? So really just starting at the basis of the learning content and the material, and then you can go into more, difficult things like application, answering questions and whatnot. But I think really stressing the fundamentals and the way you set up the curriculum is, a great way to learn the material. And then when it comes time to practice questions and test days, right, you have those down and you're ready to, apply the more advanced concepts.
He's making me feel really good. I feel like I should just pay him the money now, David. This feels good, man. He's making me feel like I did a good job getting you ready. It's making me feel really good.
Was that your expectation? And not to make this a commercial for Joe, but I'm just curious, before you kind of enrolled and engaged with Joe for the prep, what was your prep going to be like?
Oh my God. I remember I was telling Joe, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I know the exam is this many months out. And yeah, I was just like reviewing old notes that I had and really
Right.
had no structure. So I knew I needed something, right? Something to sit me down and say, hey, this is what we have to do X, Y, and Z. This is how many questions you need to do. This is what, here are some learning materials. So I think, prior to that, I really didn't have a plan. That's why, I was reaching out, looking at different providers, and then ultimately found Joe.
It's funny because when I hear that somebody, and I don't hear it often, but if I hear that somebody like didn't use, whether it's like Danko review course or someone like Joe or whoever, and they just did it on their own, the way that this exam is set up and everybody knows the difficulty level of it, it's so unique to hear that someone, they're like, yeah, I just set my own practice or my own prep schedule, and I just did it myself. Like nobody goes through this exam by themselves. Very small amount.
I don't know
Yeah,
how you
totally.
would though,
I don't know how you would either. I really don't.
right? Because like it's not like CFP makes their own books.
Right.
So you have to use one of those review Well, I guess you could use your education books.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like someone that was like, yeah, I went through Kaplan and I just used their modules online or their textbooks. Like everybody goes into a review course with this exam. It's
Hmm.
not like the other exams where you can just do it yourself.
Well, there is, if I'm not mistaken, there is part of your education that's not covered on the exam. They teach more items than what's covered on the exam, correct?
That I'm not, he would know, Jake would probably know more than I would just because he's gone through it more recently.
Yeah, they touch like on a little bit broader topics in your education coursework. Like for example, psychology wasn't taught in my education.
Hmm.
When did
We did
you
not
start
touch it at
though?
all.
When did you may have started your education after they implement, because it actually wasn't taught in mine either. But that's because they didn't implement it until a
Yeah.
year and a half after I started.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I started in July 21.
Right.
That's when I started my coursework around there. So
Yeah.
I was
They
like
may,
right on that borderline between the changes of exam and whatnot. So yeah.
yeah, because
Yeah.
I did my education through American College, but granted, I took the old exam, the 10-hour, 2-day thing when I took CFP, but we had to do like a full return. We had to do a couple like full tax returns for like a
Wow.
family as a case study. And I remember us going into more detail in the education because they didn't offer online courses. This is kind of dating myself, but this is back in 2007. So they didn't have an online version. There was no fast track. It was every module was 3 months. and we covered, and I remember with the exception of probably investments, that we went into way deeper detail than the exam did, as I remember it. But I mean, I'm kind of digging a little bit. I do remember the tax one because I remember like, like cursing up a storm trying to figure out the tax return and trying to find every online resource to figure out this tax return. But I couldn't find it. I was clearly like just so pissy about it. But all right, Jake. So we come to the end of every segment. David and I do our golden nuggets, right? One takeaway, one piece of advice, one golden nugget. Now you're through, you're on the other side. What are one or two pieces of advice that you would either give to a aspiring test taker or somebody who's right on the cusp of taking the exam in March or July next year? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah. Say whatever, review program you choose, right? Hopefully it's Joe, but it's a commitment at the end of the day, right? It's a journey, right? Some days you're gonna feel defeated and you're gonna question yourself and you're gonna think, man, am I smart enough for this, or am I gonna, do all this for nothing and retake it? But I think it's good to remind yourself that, even whatever happens, that, it's a process that you're committing to. And no matter the outcome, you're doing the work, you're putting the time in, you should be proud of yourself for that. And I think, having a structured plan, right? That's, I think, one of the biggest things that, will contribute to your success, in the coursework and the review, right? Having a structured plan, having a plan of attack to know what you're doing week by week and really committing to that. And then lastly, I'd say do your flashcards. I know, Joe, you got on me. You got on me so many times about that.
I know. I was all over you on that. I was like, flashcards. That's the nugget right there. The flashcards are key.
I don't know if you were done, Jake, but that was couldn't have been said, in my opinion, any better. Between the structure, the commitment, know that you're gonna have good days, you're gonna have bad days. Don't give her couldn't have said it any better. That's amazing advice.
Yeah, yeah. I think those are the key points for me, and that's like keep in mind for any test taker out there.
Jake, I'm gonna ask you one more question because you're you're unique. You're very even keeled. Just your personality, you're very even keeled. You never really get, even when I got on you, you never got really hot, you never got really cold. Um, Maybe give a piece of advice here for how you stay so even keeled. There's a lot of people, even in our class, that would get really crazy and they'd want to study 6 hours in one day and then do nothing the next.
Mhm.
And the thing that you keep on saying is you're gonna have good and bad days. You're not immune from that. How did you kind of mentally keep yourself going? Obviously you're an even keeled guy, but how did you mentally keep yourself going on those bad days?
Great question. I think having an outlet is important, right? I think having something outside just studying, right, that brings you joy or brings you maybe a little bit of stress relief, right? I mean, for me, it's weightlifting. I love lifting weights, going to the gym for an hour or two, right? Even when I was in study prep, I'd hit the gym for at least 45 minutes, try to get in and out, then I'd go home and study. So I think having an outlet, right, taking breaks when necessary and knowing, you're getting stressed out or, now is not a good time for studying. So really having, an outlet. Then I also say that, at least for me, it was a commitment to myself that I had made, right? It was, I had to tell friends and family, hey, I can't hang out, or hey, I can't go out tonight. I'm staying in and I'm studying, right? So having healthy boundaries set up for you in place with your relationships, your job, and all these different things. Make sure you have healthy boundaries set up and really, let them know that hey, this is important to me. This is a process. If I get this done now, don't have to worry about it later. So. Those are two important things that I did in order to keep my cool, or to stay, stress, how to limit stress and really, get through the exam.
They're great points.
Mhm.
Well, Jake, thank you so much for joining us and doing this and giving a little piece of your wisdom and your process to future CFP test takers. Once again, congratulations, man.
Yeah.
Incredible job to knock it out on the first time. And happy holidays to you and yours. And thanks for doing this. David, any final thoughts?
No, that's it. I think that your advice, both what you said originally and then what you just said about staying even keeled, is so important. And I think that if you, the listener, are taking anything from this particular episode, that's right there. That's it right there. So, Jake, great perspective. And thank you for coming on.
Of course, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jake. Happy holidays, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.